The return is not the end. Why resurrection immediately hands you a to-do list. People love resurrection stories. They love them because resurrection sounds like closure, like a neat ending, like the universe finally apologizing. It does not. Resurrection is not an apology. It's a continuation. Welcome back to the Firelight Dialogue Special. There's a particular tone people use when they're about to argue about resurrection. It's confident, it's proprietary, it has footnotes loaded like ammunition, and every year, without fail, the planet ignores all of it and just does the thing. Trees bloom, fields green, animals reappear. No doctrine, no explanation, no respect for anyone's theological exclusivity. Spring just returns anyway. By the time spring actually arrives, not metaphorically, not aspirationally, but physically, you've already survived several versions of yourself. The version that thought that winter would never end, or at least would end sooner. The version that wanted to negotiate with waiting. The version that tried to take everything with them when it was clearly time to leave. Those versions didn't make it. And that's not a tragedy, that's the point. Resurrection is not about saving everything. It's about saving what still works. After the leaving, after the purge, the fire, the bread that never got the chance to become sentimental, there's a pause. Not the waiting pause, a different one. The kind where your body hasn't caught up to the fact that the danger has passed. Liberation stories always skip this part because it's awkward. You expect triumph, you expect clarity. You expect a soundtrack. What you get instead is quiet. And then, gradually, offensively, almost as if it's not trying to impress you, life resumes. This is the moment humans eventually called resurrection, which is a big word for something we keep watching happen. Resurrection didn't start as theology. It started as an observation. Seeds crack underground. Dead-looking fields turn green. Trees that appeared fully committed to non-participation suddenly explode with leaves. Nature does not whisper this, it demonstrates it. And humans, predictably, noticed. This is where arguments usually start, because once you say resurrection, people assume you're making a claim about ownership. They assume someone is about to win. But resurrection does not belong to any single tradition. It belongs to the calendar. Egypt watched it through Osiris's death, fragmentation, reassembly, rule restored not as dominance, but as balanced. Mesopotamia watched it through descent myths. Inanna stripped of power, identity undone, return negotiated at cost. Zoroastrianism framed it as a moral structure. Light does not panic when darkness arrives because it knows how time behaves. Judaism embedded it in practice rather than spectacle. After liberation comes Shavuot. Not relief, but responsibility. Revelation is not rest. Christianity placed its central claim right where the earth insisted it belonged. After death, in spring, in a garden, at dawn. Christianity inherited this seasonal grammar and made it its central claim, right where the calendar insisted it belongs. Spring, not winter, not summer, spring, because resurrection only makes sense where death has been recent and return is visible. This is the part where people usually tense up, so let's say it clearly. The existence of other resurrection stories does not weaken Christian claims. It explains why they landed. People already knew what resurrection felt like. They'd been watching it their whole lives. Different languages, same observation. The world comes back, but not the way it left. This is the part modern listeners quietly resist. They want resurrection to mean fixed, but ancient traditions never promised that. They promised viability. Spring does not undo winter, it absorbs it. The soil remembers the cold. The body remembers the loss. The community remembers who didn't make it. Resurrection is not denial, it is integration, which is why spring festivals immediately are followed by work. Planting, counting, studying, rebuilding. Shavuot doesn't arrive with fireworks, it arrives with law. Pentecost doesn't arrive with comfort, it arrives with language, obligation, and fire that demands coherence. Pagan spring rites don't linger in ecstasy, they pivot to labor, fertility, management, and risk. Because return without structure collapses. This is the thing resurrection stories assume you already know. Life returning means you are needed again. That's not romantic, it's inconvenient. We'll pause here for a moment because continuation still requires support, and I'll thank the people who make it possible to tell these stories without turning resurrection into a motivational poster. Then we'll come back to the part no one quotes, the part where spring hands you responsibility instead of relief. Here's what every tradition agrees on quietly. Spring is not soft. It looks gentle. It photographs well. But biologically, spring is pressure. Everything grows at once. Everything competes. Everything is hungry. Which means resurrection immediately introduces new problems. This is why ancient cultures didn't treat spring as victory. They treated it as activation. You survived. Good. Now participate. Here's what resurrection does not do. It does not erase loss. It does not rewind history. It does not restore things to how they were. That's nostalgia. Resurrection restores movement. Something returns, yes, but altered. And this is where traditions quietly agree more than they argue. Christian resurrection theology does not promise a return to the old body, the old order, or the old rules. Jewish spring rituals after Passover do not pretend liberation removes responsibility. Shavuot arrives with law, obligation, and maturity. Pagan spring festivals do not linger in sentiment. They pivot quickly to planting, labor, and risk. Spring is not about comfort. It's about viability, which brings us to the most unglamorous truth of all. Resurrection is not the end of the cycle. It's the middle. Life returns and immediately demands participation. Fields must be planted, communities reorganized, resources managed, which is why spring festivals are both joyful and busy. There's laughter, yes, but also work, because return without responsibility collapses. This is where people get frustrated with resurrection stories. They want closure. Spring offers continuity instead. The light comes back, the danger recedes, and now you have to live again, which is harder than surviving. Survival has clear rules, living doesn't. That's why resurrection stories exist. Not to end the story, but to keep it going. They remind people that despair is not permanent, but neither is exemption. The point is not that everything will be fine. The point is that everything continues, and continuation is enough. Here's the quietest agreement across traditions. Despair is lying to you when it says nothing changes. Spring proves that wrong every year. Not dramatically, not loudly, just persistently. People argue about who owns resurrection. Meanwhile, the trees just do it. No announcements, no disclaimers, no follow-up emails. They bloom, which feels instructive. This is where people get uncomfortable with religion, not because of belief, but because of expectation. Resurrection does not say you're done. It says you're back. Back in your body, back in your community, back in time. And time, unlike winter, moves fast now. This is why egg symbolism persists everywhere, not because eggs are magical, but because they're honest. Break the shell too early, nothing survives. Wait too long, nothing emerges. Timing matters. So does restraint. So does attention. Resurrection stories exist because humans needed reassurance that engaging again was worth the risk, that vulnerability would not automatically lead to annihilation. That opening back up after loss was not foolish, and they needed these stories to be repeatable, annual, reliable, because memory fades, despair lies, and winter, left unchallenged, makes a compelling argument. So humans tell the story again and again and again, not to convince the universe, to convince themselves. So here we are at the return, not the end, not the solution, just the fact that something, against any reasonable expectations, continues. Humans didn't invent resurrection because we wanted comfort. We invented it because we needed evidence. Evidence that winter wasn't final. Evidence that loss wasn't absolute. Evidence that change could move in a direction that wasn't annihilation. Call the story whatever you need to call it. Tell it in whatever language holds you upright. Just don't pretend it came from nowhere. It came from watching the light leave and daring to notice when it returned. The light comes back. Life resumes, and you are asked to re-enter it with slightly more wisdom than the last time. That's the offer. Not certainty, not safety, participation. Call it resurrection, call it rebirth. Call it the planet refusing to cooperate with despair. Just don't pretend it's optional. I'm Pat Cancer. Take what you need and leave the rest. Live and let live, and always ask, what's the life lesson in this? Join us again for the next Firelight Dialogues episode, and bring a friend. The fire is still lit, and now you're needed again. If things are growing again where you are, you now know why that matters.